Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We talk politics, culture, business, anything news related that's important to us Fort Worthians. We discuss as we decide to build the future of this great place. I'm here with my co-host, Ann Zeta. We've been seeing a lot of each other.
We have been spending a little more time together. We're getting to be like those other podcasters that do all their socializing together. I don't think we've gotten that far.
Yeah, they like get tattoos together.
Yeah, we will not be doing that. Definitely not doing that. No, but we have, and we've split up our recording this week. So we have an interview that we did earlier, and now we're kind of circling back to do our short stories and our wins and losses.
Yeah, so that interview is with Robert Sturns, 3-time 817 pod interviewee. And he's like the Patrick Mahomes of interviewees on 817 podcasts. Always love it. He's always one of my favorite guests to have, so we dive into a lot. But we did that earlier in the week, so a lot of these short stories are things that came out past that conversation. And so some of it's about downtown, but I want you guys to know that we didn't really discuss the Sandman Hotel new updates with him, which we're going to get into because it kind of happened afterwards of that discussion. And let's talk about Sandman Hotel and some of the interesting updates.
Well, I think in the past, our articles have been kind of Fort Worth Report heavy. And as we were preparing for this morning, we realized that quite a few of our articles were Star Telegram provided. So this first article is the Fort Worth Star Telegram article titled, "Workers Involved in Sandman Hotel Construction Say They Witnessed Irregular Practices." So this is an ongoing investigation, we need to say right off the bat. And so there's they're gathering information, and some individuals and organizations have been responsive to some inquiries from the Star Telegram on this. But basically, former employees of the Sandman Signature Hotel developer say that they witnessed what they considered to be irregular construction practices during the renovation of the downtown Fort Worth Tower, where an explosion likely involved a gas leak, injuring 21 people earlier this month. So they've touched base with the fire chief, and he said last week that it's a high likelihood that there was a gas leak in the building and that equipment such as laundry machines or a water heater ignited the explosion that destroyed the lower levels of the century-old W.T. Wagner Tower. The Star Telegram interviewed 4 people who were employed by the developer that included in the construction project, and said that they were concerned about the quality of work on the gas, plumbing, and other parts of the building. The former employees included a project manager and a supervisor, all of whom were laid off last summer after the hotel opened in March and the restaurant opened in June. And so my question was, were they laid off because the project ended, or were they laid off for some other reason? Because the article goes on to talk about some of them expressing concerns over things that they identified, and even losing sleep over the conditions of things that they found, and some back orders of materials that were needed in order to address some gas plumbing. And so that all can lead to some serious concerns about what the condition was of everything once construction was complete.
Yeah, and this was some of Star Telegram's best work in a long time. It was an exclusive interview, so they went out and did the digging to find these people and really do that work. So shout out to all the journalists who really collaborated to make this happen. But one of the former employees is Tyler Shanta Chone. She worked for Northland as an administrator assistant and handled invoices from contracts. She talked about how she never saw, or there was the chief plumber, the lead plumber who was really in charge of everything. She said how she just never saw them there.
Yeah, they said the former employees said that they rarely, if ever, saw the responsible master plumbers and electricians perform or directly supervise the work in the hotel and restaurant, and rarely they would see them occasionally checking over work that the in-house crews had done ahead of inspections. And I think it appears the Star Telegram has requested information from the city on those inspections, but they haven't received that information yet.
So here's the juicy part from the former employee, Tyler. She said last summer, after museum has opened, the gas pipe in the kitchen was found to be not up to code and needed to be replaced. She said she went to the hotel to get items crossed off a punch list of miscellaneous unfinished tasks. The punch list, she said, indicated that the gas piping in the restaurant needed to be updated because the original team put the wrong piping in. Our team had to come in and fix that, she said. She was let go in August and does not know whether the piping was fixed. She was told by the company that all the work was finished. Now, the other interviewed by Star Telegram, who was laid off around the same time, was a project superintendent who asked for anonymity pending the results of the official investigation. He has been working on another Sandman Hotel and was sent to Fort Worth worksite to complete punch list tasks in early August. So would have been to connect to fix the thing that Tyler was worried about. But when he arrived, he found a 2-inch gas pipe had been left disconnected in a sub-level basement floor below the restaurant. He said he immediately alerted the Plano-based Northland contractor in charge of the project. A text message exchange, which was shared with Star Telegram, showed a project superintendent discussing the disconnected pipes with Espinosa. That's the person at the Plano-based Northland base. Including a photo of the pipes. The gas line was for a makeup air unit, which circulates fresh air into the kitchen of the restaurant. The former superintendent expressed concern and relief that the gas line in question had yet to be turned on. So, Tyler, the superintendent was concerned about this open gas pipe, but luckily it wasn't turned on. Yet, because the necessary part have been in back order and they would not connect the gas until winter, according to the text message. And so this part right here is just like,
it's winter.
Yeah, it's winter and boom goes the dynamite, so the crazy part about there's a clear, Tyler was concerned if this got done, but then the person who's being anonymous went and was supposed to complete this project in August, took a picture, saw this, talked to Alexander Espinosa at Plano about this issue. They were relieved that the pipe wasn't turned on, but they were going to get this thing that was back ordered so that they could turn it on for winter. Winter is here, and then boom, there's what happened in January. So this to me is just, I'm interested to see what happens from here and what kind of impact this has on the open investigation.
I mean, it does say that the former superintendent said that the project's plumbing foreman to connect the pipe on August 3rd, and that the former superintendent expressed relief to one of the project managers in a text message saying that he could sleep at night knowing that it was fixed that day. So I think there's some reporting that says that they did follow through and fix it.
Yeah.
But again, they're collecting all of this information and trying to sort out what happened when, and maybe some of those inspection reports from the city will tell whether these things actually did happen or not.
This is great reporting. I mean, this is because at the end of the day, regardless if it was fixed or not, this was a topic. It's not like there was a random explosion. 4 months ago, there was a whole team of people worried and concerned about a pipe being not closed or if it was in use. So just the fact that this was off the radar. There was a conversation about these pipes in a basement of this hotel, which I just think is just fascinating to the investigation. And we'll see what happens from this, but wow, just great insight and article by Star Telegram. And this is why you should support your local newspapers.
Yeah, and this was Cody Copeland, who is an accountability reporter. So
Come on
he's
now.
keeping people accountable. So this is not connected to the hotel explosion discussion, but it is also businesses that were impacted that are in the nearby area. The Star Telegram also, same reporter reported on We've Been Forgotten about West 8th Street businesses struggling after the Sandman explosion. So there's several businesses in the vicinity that the closed streets and closed sidewalks have impacted customers being able to walk to them. And so Downtown Fort Worth Inc. has put some signage out to kind of direct people to them. But this is just a little reminder in the midst of all of this for people to support those downtown businesses. And we'll put this article in the show notes because there's a couple of businesses that I was unaware of, and they sound really good, and I would like to go try them, a coffee shop and that sort of thing. So there is Barber's Bookstore, Cowtown Segway Tours, La Cremia, and Thompson's Bookstore are the businesses that Downtown Fort Worth Inc. has put out signage to kind of encourage folks to make their way around, and because they are open and struggling a little bit because people are, I guess, maybe avoiding this part of downtown.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And yeah, look forward to exploring those now because now I know what those businesses are. We talked about accountability. The Star Telegram continues to keep people accountable and write stories that are important for us. So as Fort Worth fights to keep its police chase policy secret, other cities share theirs online. Harrison Mantis wrote this January 25th. Interesting. You always get to learn something new all the time. Even we do this for 3 years now. Of the 10 largest cities in Texas, Fort Worth is the only one that doesn't publicize its police vehicle pursuit policy. Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, El Paso, and Plano post their police chases policies online. Lubbock and Corpus Christi makes them available through public information requests. Arlington posts annual reports of police vehicle chases, including records of policy violations and the repercussions for the offending police officer. Fort Worth has an informational copy of its general orders online. However, several sections are left out, including the vehicle pursuit policy. You're the one who brought this up to our attention. How do you feel about this, and what is your take?
Well, I think that what ended up happening is that the city of Fort Worth requested to not release that information when the Star Telegram asked through a public information request to have that information. And that went down to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General sided with the Star Telegram and said that Fort Worth should release it. And then at a council meeting earlier this month, the council voted to file suit against the Attorney General to continue to not have to release the records, their policy. And I think several council members expressed concern. It wasn't a unanimous vote, I don't think. And I brought this I think it's interesting that we're the outlier in this, and I'm not sure what the reasoning is. I think they do state, a police representative stated that the policy includes more detailed, sensitive information than that in other cities' policies include, and it would be detrimental to publicly release this information. I'm not sure people who are running from the police are taking into consideration what the policy might be. So I'm not sure who would be detrimentally impacted by knowing what the policy is.
Yeah. It's not like people who do bad stuff
and run from the police
expect to get caught and, proactively prepares for...
And don't run from in certain areas or run in a different way because they know that the police might not chase them if they do it in that way. I'm not sure any of that is.
Yeah, and this goes to the long list of things that we feel like are not clearly discussed or shared with the public in our police community when it comes to building relationships with the public, especially when so much of our tax dollars go to you guys. So I don't feel like technically we're your bosses. So if we want you to know why you perform or act the way you do in a crisis, that could lead to car crashes, that could lead to people dying, that could lead to, incidents or things needing to be improved on roads, blockages of highways, whatever the case may be that impacts our regular life, it's clear that we should know what's going on. And the fact that the only person who said no was Chris Nettles and Jared Williams was not there, I just don't know.
As a law-abiding citizen who never plans to run away from the police, I'd kind of like to know what to expect if something like that were to happen around me. Maybe that would inform how I think everybody needs to do better at getting out of the way of any emergency vehicles. And so I think just more information is better. And I'm not sure it would be, again, I'm not in their shoes. I don't know exactly what it is that's in this policy that they think is going to cause there to be a problem. And so always open to hearing that. But in this case, I don't think that.
Yeah. And the city is suing the Attorney General. And I would never have guessed we're on the side of the Attorney General. But it just seems like a lot of effort, and I don't know why there couldn't be with all this money, don't you guys have a PR team on how to we should probably be more transparent with the community and just make new policies whatever you're trying to hide because it's too detailed, but improve this so that we have more updates when police chases are happening. All right, so Texas is okay with keeping police unaccountable on certain policies, but we want to keep our Fort Worth ISD as accountable as ever. And so we are looking at changing how we communicate with parents and communicate with students on their efficiencies compared to state exams. For the first time in Fort Worth ISD, kids are now getting report cards without grades, and this is a new shift that's looking to be rolled out over the next few years. Parents of elementary students in Fort Worth Independent School District will no longer see letter grades on their kids' report cards. Fort Worth ISD officials are planning to shift to a new grading model for lower grades that shows parents how students are performing against state standards instead of raw percentage for each subject. It's one of a pair of changes the district is making with an eye toward giving parents more information about how their kids are doing academically. District officials plan to use the new standards-based grading model from pre-K through fifth grade, but the changes represent a major shift from how teachers have assessed students in the past, and it will take years to implement, said Gracie Guerrero, the district's associate superintendent of learning and leading.
I think the part of the article that I found really interesting is Fort Worth ISD parents need better access to information, because they point out that with just a letter grade that often parents think their kids are doing better than they are, and that that some of the material looked like, just was really hard to ascertain and understand. And so if they're going to do this type of reporting, it's going to give parents better understanding, but there may be it's probably harder than just assigning a letter grade. And it's more information that a teacher has to communicate to parents. And so it's more work for teachers. And I think that teachers definitely need to be given the opportunity and the time to do this sort of assessment in order for it to be successful. Otherwise, it could just end up being kind of equivalent to a letter grade. But the part that they talked about where parents getting onto the the parent portal now isn't giving them the information that they need, and that often parents are, taken by surprise that their kids are not doing as well as they thought they were doing. That tons of parents seem to be thinking that their kids are doing better than that they are, and then it turns out that they are not doing as well. So I think that they are addressing a problem that needs to be addressed, both trying to get parents, organizations to be pointed in the right direction and getting the right information so that they can assist their kids better.
A survey conducted in May on behalf of the Fort Worth Education Partnership and the Sid Richardson Foundation, 80% of parents who live in Fort Worth ISD boundary said they believe their kids could read on a grade level, but in public schools across the city, just 44% of students scored on grade level in reading on last year's state tests. So, right, that's that disconnection of if A's and B's can be inflated by bonus points, leadership, character, good credit. A lot of teachers motivate kids to get more engaged in the classroom by giving them extra points on their in class. And so a kid could bring home a B or an A because of effort or engagement, but still maybe not
master the material.
Yeah. So I see this as a good thing, but how do you scale this up across the school district, and how do you give, like you said, teachers time to now be able to report these kind of things when you have 100 plus students?
Yeah, you've got to be able to, put more time into each student individually, and then in your reporting, and then in communicating with parents. And that's all taking into, assuming that parents are going to be cooperative in all of this as well. I think that a lot of this reminds me that we put a lot on our schools, and we expect our schools, we point out all the time things that we expect our schools to do beyond just teaching. And now we're asking them to do the teaching at a higher standard and a higher level without giving them additional time and funding. Clearly, we've talked about that too, to pull this off. And I think a lot of times parents want the school to just handle it. And I think that this is pointing out that it can't just be put on the shoulders of teachers and have it all taken care of at school. Parents have to be involved. And, you would hope that they would want to be willing partners with the teachers to make sure that student outcomes are the best. And I think this would be an opportunity to try to accomplish that. But they also talk about the fact that many schools don't have active PTAs in school zones where parents are having to work extra jobs, and they do this type of interaction during business hours. So are these parents going to be able to avail themselves of this more communication with these teachers?
What's great about the 817 podcast, we don't just read the local news, we also read a lot of national news. So we can connect what's going on locally, but also what we're seeing nationally. And the New York Times actually just had a story about the misguided war on the SAT. Now, the SAT is a national standardized test, very different than state tests. But I also feel like why giving parents an honesty of how well their kids are doing on standardized tests is because standardized tests, and they use the SAT as example, are strong predictors of student outcomes after college. So you could look at kids' GPAs, and if kids have high GPAs in a school, that doesn't correlate to high grades in school, in college, as do a standardized test does. A standardized test shows a more promising indicator that a kid will do better in college and perform better in college. They're also showing attending an elite graduate school is often aligned to standardized tests, working in prestigious firms. Also, there's a lot of social capital and inequities around that. And also, this is why a lot of people from progressive leadership don't really believe in standardized tests, because it hurts black and brown students. But when you look at kids, when you equalize the equity piece and you look at the kids who come from disadvantaged communities who scored well on the SAT or ACT, they correlate to strongly performing well in college, way better than kids who had high GPA from disadvantaged schools. And so these state tests really give us an honest assessment, at least tries to give us an honest landscape of how well kids really understand material. So I think this could be really awesome for Fort Worth ISD if we get this right, and not only getting it right for us, but then being an example to the state and nationally on how do you do this kind of grading. All right, beautiful people, it is time for the big story. Our big story is an interview with Robert Sturns, Director of Fort Worth Economic Development Department. Robert has more than 25 years of experience holding leadership roles in the city. He's worked at the city for 20 years, and with his job, he has been directly engaged in the announcements of over $3 billion in new capital investments and 25,000 jobs here in Fort Worth. And so we get the privilege to talk to him and sit down and get into the nitty gritty. My one probably take, it's been like 5 days since we've talked to Robert. I was like, we really got into the nitty gritty fast. So if we get too deep, this is our third conversation. And I feel like it's a chance to, if you want to hear some of the earlier conversations, they're definitely online, Spotify, Apple. You can go back and hear the first two. But here is an interview with Robert Sturns. All right, so today we have one of our favorite guests that always comes on to the 817 pod. We're excited to have him in person today. This is his third time on the pod, but the first time in person, we have Robert Sturns. Usually we start with, what is your Fort Worth story? But they could just go back to the first one, which was a good pod anyways, to hear that. So can you just say kind of a 2023 update on life and kind of where Fort Worth is from an economic side?
Sure. Thanks, EJ, for having me on again. And it's just
First
different
time with
experience.
me.
First time with Ann.
Yeah.
I say it's a little odd. I've worked with Ann, obviously, in her prior role as a city council member. So now having this private experience is a little interesting. So I'll try to.
I sometimes pull in my prior experience to the pod. So
I'm sure that will
there
be
may
that
be
will
a
be
few
coming
comments
up.
in that arena.
Yeah, but again. For me, 2023, now 24, has been an interesting year. 20 years with the city, so that was a big milestone that I just hit a couple of months ago. Didn't expect that to happen. That was not my intention when I started with the city. So it's good to continue to be here and see some of the changes that have happened over the past 2 decades, and to be a part of some of that change.
It's funny. I didn't intend to stay in Texas when I moved here 33 years ago, but here I am.
Here we are.
So I guess kind of looking at what are you most proud of 2023, kind of from the economic development team? I know you guys have been doing a lot. I saw the piece also in Star Telegram where they kind of highlighted some important stuff. For those of those who listen who don't read those kind of articles, what kind of updates do you kind of have on what the team's been working on?
Sure. So 2023 was really a great year from us when you think about the new capital investment we were able to attract to the city. So about $2 billion of new investment to the city, 4,000 jobs estimated to be created as part of those projects. And they were across a multitude of different industries. And so that was something to really be proud of. It was an extension or expansion of the activity from 22. And, going into 23, especially about mid 2023, when the interest rates started to get a little shaky, started to see some of the weakening in the economy, we thought things were just going to go, down the toilet. And then we end up having like $1 billion month in August, so one of our strongest months ever, outside of when we did Facebook. We got a massive investment there. So had this pretty substantial period in August where we got a lot of projects done. And then going into the remainder of 23 and first part of 24, haven't seen that slowdown that we anticipated. And we're starting to see interest rate drop again. So yeah, I'm hopeful that 24 will be at least as productive as 23 has been. There's still some troubling things in the economy that we're trying to keep an eye on. But, I would say the thing that I'm really the most proud of is the fact that my staff, who weathered a lot of different changes over the past year to 18 months, really just we're able to kind of pull everything together. And that's, not only the recruitment retention side, that's some of the activities we did on the community redevelopment, revitalization, getting the Main Street program launched and moving forward. We entered our second year of our marketing campaign with Schaefer, some great press that the city's been getting. So just being able to kind of manage all of the different things that are thrown at us. And that's not mentioning massive projects like Texas A&M and Panther Island and everything else that we have to deal with. So just keeping our heads above water is an accomplishment in and of itself.
Yeah, I think that you mentioned the Main Street program, and it participated in kind of the selection committee alongside several staff departments coming up with which areas we're going to get those. And kudos to the Economic Development Department for partnering with Main Street USA to bring that to Fort Worth, because I think it's going to be really beneficial. But that does spark a question about the different economic development incentives that you're providing for Fort Worth businesses versus recruiting outside businesses. And, I think my question had, what percentage is that? And that was something that also came up quite a bit during the time that I was on council. That support for local businesses versus recruiting and bringing in from outside. And it doesn't have to be a specific percentage, but what are y'all working on in that area?
Yeah, I think there's been some really good projects. Again, the Sinclair Digital with Farouk, who did the hotel, but then he spun off the technology he's been working on tied to the hotel into a new company. And so there's a lot of energy around that. And when you think about, what Texas A&M is going to bring to us in the next 3 to 4 years, the opportunity to link a tier 1 research university up with the Sinclair Digitals and the Probably Monsters, these are smaller companies that aren't necessarily on everyone's radar screen, but could be significant players 10, 15, 20 years from now. We talked about, how much of our work is recruiting new companies versus incentivizing existing companies. Well, the best thing you could do is help your smaller companies that started here grow here. And maybe in 20 years, we have the next Pier 1, the next Radio Shack that grew in this community, are staples in this community, and are leading a world leader in the industries that they're in. And so that's those types of things I'm really excited about. Not necessarily the big things that are hitting us today, but what may be big for us in the future. And then you look at companies like Siemens, who's doing a great investment here. They just received an award from Site Selection Magazine, or Business Facilities Magazine, for Impact Award for advanced manufacturing. You had LG just open their EV charging facility here in Fort Worth. You got companies like DrinkPack, which are doing 2 massive sites within the city. We got some really great jobs created in District 8, which, again, that's another area that has not seen a lot of that job creation and investment. So the fact that we had Siemens, DrinkPack, and Americold all three companies going in and making huge investments and creating new jobs. That's great for District 8. So I'm excited about the types of things that are out there. And I think, as I said, the community had some great wins. And again, I say community, it's not the city, it's not my staff, it's not the EDP, the chamber. This was a community effort, and we all have a hand in bringing these projects forward and having that growth happen. And so again, all of our incentives are based on new investment being created. So in order to qualify for an incentive that's really of any value, you either have to be doing a build-to-suit, so building an entirely new building out of the ground, or doing some level of significant expansion to an existing facility. That's what develops the increment that in turn drives the incentive that you're eligible for. So most companies that are doing, existing companies that are doing some level of expansion, tends to be, we're going to go in and we're going to upgrade our facilities, the interior of our facility. We've got some old equipment, so we want to upgrade, get a lot of business personal property in there. Maybe we got some manufacturing lines we need to upgrade. So great investment for the city. Definitely want to see that company do that expansion. But even if you applied 100% of that new increment that's going to be generated from that business personal property, it's still not really moving the needle much. So that's one reason why we really began to look at a couple of things. So in our policy, we've always had kind of a lower level of required investment for business expansion projects, companies that are here versus companies that are coming here. So if you're coming here, you have to have $25 million of investment as a minimum to even qualify. The threshold for existing businesses is much lower. We also have been quietly over the years developing an economic development fund that was seeded with a property that one of our quasi entities, the Local Development Corporation, owned several years ago. We sold that, took the proceeds, set that aside for economic development projects. And then over the past couple of years, City Manager David Cook has allocated an additional $2 million every year for the past 2 years to help grow that fund. And that's really been driven by TIFs that were projected to come off the tax roll. So all those new dollars that have been going into the TIFs, as the TIFs expire, those dollars are now coming back to the city. So we're taking a portion of that and putting that into economic development. And so that gives us the ability to do kind of cash grants that are not necessarily based on new increment, but it's for a company that we want to see here, that we want to grow, but they're not really going to invest a ton of new dollars, or say it's an office development and they're going into an existing office space, bringing great employees, paying good wages, but they're occupying an existing office, so they're not generating a lot of new tax increment. That allows us to compete for those types of projects, and you see that in our smaller communities, our 4A, 4B communities. So those 4A, 4B, for those of you that don't know, is a nice law that the legislature put in place several years ago. So our smaller communities, our Planos, our Allens, our Friscos, when there was nothing out there but nice grassland, weren't paying anything in the transit. Yeah, nothing but grassland. They said, hey, we can't compete against the Fort Worth and the Dallases, and so we need a tool. And the legislature, in their wisdom, said, okay, we will allow you all to take sales tax and dedicate that towards economic development purposes. And so they, over the years, have built up war chests of $15, $20, $30 million a year that is purely economic development. And so when you have a company, I'll take Toyota, for example, when they went to Frisco, they're able to give them a cash grant up front for moving the company there. That could be several $1 million in cash. And then they can turn around and do the exact same tax abatements or Chapter 380 agreements that we can do for 10, 15, 20 years. So large cities, Fort Worth and Dallas, because of the way the law was written, our population was too large. We don't have the ability to do 4A, 4B sales tax set-asides. So we've had to get creative with how we can develop a fund and be competitive in that aspect.
And what's interesting about that is that, oftentimes you hear people complaining that the city is giving away money to businesses. And I'm always having to explain to them that it's taxes that wouldn't even be coming to the city at all if they were not having that tax abatement. It's not their tax dollars being handed over to somebody. But in the case of those smaller communities, it is their tax dollars being handed over. Right,
exactly. Yeah, I always appreciated that, and that you understood that. Because, again, we bring these deals to council. They pass it, then I'm not going to pick on any of our local press, But just across the board, it's yes, X company, the city gives $20 million of incentives. Well, no, the company has to first generate the
A whole
$20
lot
million.
more than that.
Yeah, way more than that because we don't put 100% in. So the company has to generate those dollars. Then they have to meet all the commitments to the agreement. So they have to hit the investment. They got to hit the jobs. They got to pay the wages. They got to do their MWB participation. So all of that goes into the compliance, and we check that on an annual basis. And if they don't hit it, their incentive is reduced, and that's a story that doesn't really ever get told over time.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you. What, over your 20 years of doing this, what is kind of the success rate of hitting an incentive?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, and our policies have morphed over the years. And so that our tax abatement policy by law has to be updated every 2 years. And that we tend to update our Chapter 380 policy, our grant policy, at the same time that we do our tax abatement policy. So over time, those policies have changed. We never had a wage requirement in our policy up until a few years ago. At one time, we had a 25% or good faith effort commitment to MWBs. Now it's a 15% hard commitment. It's either go, no go, either you hit it or you get a 10% reduction. We had supply and service spending as part of it at one time, and we do still have a few of those agreements that have supply and service spending. So, and again, if they don't hit the initial investment, it's in default and the deal goes away anyway. So the vast majority of the projects that have commitments tied to them, they've all hit the investment numbers to be eligible. I would say where they still continue to struggle and where we as a city continue to struggle is really on the MBE participation. I think some of that was tied to the older agreements that only had that good faith effort. So in certain cases, a company, they had a 25% commitment, air quotes for those you can't see. But if they made a good faith effort and they showed that, well, we reached out to some MBs, we maybe had an outreach meeting, and so we met our good faith effort. We tried. Yeah, we made an effort. They would get some credit for that, and we kind of said we're going to go away with that. Oh, sorry. Yes. Let me go back and define what an MBE is. So, MWBE is a minority or women-owned business enterprise. That was the definition under our previous ordinance. It's now called business equity firms, but basically it's the same thing. Minority and women-owned businesses have a certain commitment that have to be satisfied under these agreements. And so several years ago, we put in a hard stop. It's like either you spend these dollars or your incentive is automatically reduced by 10%. And that's 10% over the life of the deal. So if they were expecting a 50% abatement or a 50% grant, if they don't hit that number, it's dropped down to 40, regardless of anything else you do. And so if you don't hit your employment commitments, for example, your agreement may now only be 35%. And I think that's going to help us as some of these older deals that had that good faith effort piece roll off, and we see more of these deals that have the hard commitments come into place. But I will also add that we're one of the few cities that has a hard commitment like that. Most cities do continue to have some type of good faith effort component in their MWBE or business equity policy.
Well, and I think your partnership with Beck, is it? That's
yes.
To kind of grow that pipeline
yes.
of so that good faith effort to reach out can result in connecting with a business that meets the requirements.
Yeah. And that came out of, the partnership with Beck came out of the work that they did on Dickey's Arena. And we had a lot of serious conversations with the Hispanic Chamber, the Black Chamber, the Regional Hispanic Contractors Association, Regional Black Contractors. They were really pushing to get higher levels of MWB participation on that project. And we said, okay, well, let's, once we get past this project, what are some of the things that we can put in place on a longer term to build capacity? And Beck stepped up and said, hey, we'd really like to talk about creating this construction school so smaller firms can partner with a large company like Beck. They're kind of serving in a mentor capacity to them. And that's resulted in several companies, smaller companies, getting some large contracts with Beck. So it's been a successful thing.
So like when you look at it seems like these incentive structure and like these projects seem so much collaborative negotiation or
yes.
is that 2 days in a room, or is it like email back and forth? Like, how's this? Like, are y'all
I
like
wish it was
deciding
2
rock,
days in a
paper,
room.
scissors? Like, what does, like, what's the lifeline on like how long this works, and like how does the negotiation work?
So you want the background of how we actually do the thing, huh?
Yeah, make the stew.
Yeah. Well, it really comes. The process starts a lot of different ways. It can start through a request for proposals or request for sites that comes in through a site selection consultant, or that may come in through the state, through the governor's office. And they're always under some code name. So it's always Project
So you
Alpha.
can't
or,
figure
So
out
you never
who
know who
it
it is. And they give you some very, high level components. So they'll say Project Alpha is in this industry. They're looking to invest $100 million and they're going to create 300 jobs. And we need 250 acres. Maybe they'll have something on utility usage. Maybe they'll need to be close to a rail line. I mean, these are just kind of the big parameters that they look at. And so you go through this process, and this is what we do with the Economic Development Partnership, and prior to that, the Fort Worth Chamber. We engage with the real estate community, just send out sites that kind of meet the criteria. That's kind of the first cut in the site selection process. I like to call it the site elimination process because that's really what they do. So they just get a ton of sites and they just start cutting it down. Like, okay, you met this, yes, you're in. You didn't meet this piece, you're out. And so that goes back and forth for a little while. Then they'll narrow it down to a smaller list of sites that they want to do a little bit more of a deep dive on. And then you start to get down, and they'll start asking about incentives usually about that time. And then that process continues to cut down. And finally, they'll get down to a handful of sites. And that's really when you get into the negotiation process. So that entire thing could last 2 or 3 months. It could last a year. We've had companies that have started the site selection process. We've been talking to them for 6 months. They go quiet, don't hear anything from them again. 6 months after the fact, okay, we're back now. We want to make this project happen. So it's really hard to say how long that process can take. It really depends on, how advanced in the process the company is and how advanced the site selector is. But once it gets to the point where they're selecting between site A or site B, that's really 90-day process from the time we get, term sheets kind of worked out, negotiated. We start making presentations to the city council. We have action items they have to actually vote. We have reinvestment zones that may have to be created for tax abatements. All of that process tends to take 90 days or so, depending on the company. So it is a very long process. Yeah.
When did you feel like winning companies became like a measurement stick for your city's growing well? Like, was it always like that, or is like?
I've never considered winning companies. That should never be the end of the day, end all be all thing you're looking at. I mean, so if your objective is only to win companies, then we could go out and do 100%. We're going to give away the farm. We're going to give you all the incentives you're going to generate, and we'll probably win, 80, 90% of the deals that we do. And we can stand up at the end of the day, at the end of the year, and say, rah, rah, look at us. Yeah, look at this big list of projects we did, without any regard for, well, is this a type of industry that we're interested in? Or is these the types of jobs that we're interested in creating? Are they going to the parts of the city that we want to see companies invest in? So I've never considered that. And I was really... When we started talking about the wage requirement, and this was, again, when David Cook joined the city, and he said, why don't we have a wage requirement? That's a good question. I don't know. Why don't we have one? So I'm glad that we are not considered the low-cost site anymore. So there used to be site selectors that would look at Fort Worth and they would say, well, I can pay $35,000, $40,000 in wages, and I get the land pretty cheap. So we were like the low-cost alternative. We're not that anymore. So we're starting to see a higher level of projects that are looking at us. They understand, look, you got to pay a minimum of $55,000, so you're not going to be eligible. These distribution companies, and if you're paying $40,000, great. Love to come have you in the city. Feel free to come, but we're not going to incentivize that. We're not putting the public dollars in it. So it's never been about the numbers. It's really been, are we doing the right things to grow the city in the right way?
So do other city economic development teams, do y'all have like a symposium or a conference or an association where y'all collaborate and talk, or is this pretty every city's on their own island and you're competing against each other?
No, you have, so there's several there's several economic development organizations. There's the Texas Economic Development Corporation, TEDC. You have the International Economic Development Corporation, IEDC. You have the Site Selectors Guild, which is primarily site selectors by the name, but a lot of economic development professionals engage with that group. So, just on a professional level, there are a number of different entities you can be a part of. There's professional designations, et cetera. But just, as far as how we all coordinate or talk with each other within the Metroplex, yeah, some really great relationships. I mean, we talk about different things we're working on. We kick around some different ideas that we may have. So it is collaborative, but, when it gets down to the point of, if a company's looking at Fort Worth or they're looking at Dallas, well, yeah, we're going to...
It's a little competitive.
Yeah, we're going to get the sticks out and we're going to go to war. It's okay, this is the project we want. But we do a lot of work together. So it's a lot of sharing of information and sharing of knowledge.
So you had given some shout outs to your staff previously. And so one of the questions I had is, do you have any best ideas that you and your staff have created that haven't been implemented?
Ooh, that haven't been implemented. That is a good question. I don't know that there have been things that we haven't implemented. Now, there have been things that have taken a lot longer to get implemented than I would have liked to see. So like this Economic Development Fund, for example. I mean, we were talking about that for, probably 3 or 4 years before we finally got some traction. And we were kind of doing it ad hoc by acquiring property, selling property, things like that. So,
So did the first funding for that come from the Pinnacle deal on Lancaster?
The first funding actually came from the American Iron Horse property out by.
I'm familiar with that as well.
Yeah. So we sold that facility. Then we constructed the Pinnacle Bank Place, and then sold that. And so those two sales combined really.
It seems like that was a little bit of proof of concept that then
Correct.
got the city manager's office to start
Right.
funding it more robustly.
Yeah. I'd say if I was looking at some things that we haven't really invested in, or things that we really wanted to drive down on, it's some of the small business stuff. Coming out of COVID, I think we talked about this on the last time I was here. We had this huge focus on CARES Act dollars and getting money out there and helping people survive, and did great work with that. But once that spigot was off, it was off. I mean, there was nothing to continue some long-term support, and so that's and we've done some programmatic types of things, but at the end of the day, companies, smaller businesses are still needing capital. So that's why we did the CDFI program, and we were lucky to be able to have ARPA dollars to kind of jumpstart that. So we've been able to leverage federal dollars to do some of these things, but at the end of the day, some of that stuff's going to continue to run out. So we've got to, I think, begin to invest in our small businesses, to the extent that we can continue to have them be supported and grow and scale up within the city.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think that I served on the committee coming out of COVID for that. So that was an exciting time. And I think that is something that individuals and small businesses continue to ask about, because as these big deals get reported on, they feel like, well, what about us? I think that's a really good thing. And then a final question that I had, and you probably have some more questions, EJ, was the way that we've approached economic development, as you've described here, has been heavily weighted towards incentives. Are there some unique economic development ideas that we're leaving on the table? I know that those smaller communities have that option that we don't have, but are there some things that Fort Worth is not doing that we could be doing?
Well, I'll kind of go back to my earlier statement that, the end goal should not be to count numbers. I would say the end goal should be, and I might get in trouble for saying this, so I'm gonna think about how I want to say this, because I've said this before in some interviews. I think at the end of the day, my job would be to not have economic development incentives, right? And I think if you ask anyone in the space, they would say the same things. Like, yeah, at the end of the day, we prefer not to have economic development experience. What we would prefer to have is strong, resilient communities, great amenities, great open space, great small business environment. So all the things that a company would look for to say, yeah, that's the place that I want to be. And we don't have to incentivize them. But that's not the world we live in today. So we have to compete just like everyone else is competing. So I would say it's not necessarily a waiting on the incentives. It's what are the things that we are doing outside the incentive realm to build up the community as a vibrant place to be. And so I know you're a big champion for transit. So what are we doing on the transit side of things? Open space is a big initiative of the mayor. So how do we continue to engage on that? What are the things we're doing from a partnership standpoint with our colleges and universities to make sure we have a talented workforce? I mean, all of those things should be the foundation, the building blocks of creating a vibrant city. And then the incentives, whether they're in place or not, they're the cherry on top that makes the deal happen. No company is coming to Fort Worth or any other community if you don't have the right site, if you don't have the right jobs, the right talent, you don't have the right facility. You're never going to incentivize your way through bad metrics on either of those issues. So you've got to have all those things in place. And you've got that, then the incentives become an issue that you can talk about. But you've got to have all those other things first.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe I let you say the transit thing, because that was my question that I did forget to ask.
Yeah.
And I know that you and I had discussions about this when Amazon was looking at Fort Worth. And that was, do you think that public transportation plans have an impact on economic development, and do you feel that we should be doing some things differently? I definitely do. I'm sure that you know, because I think that's a really important thing. But that speaks to that vibrant community that you just described. And from my opinion, the Economic Development Department at the city is doing a lot of really forward thinking in almost the planning arena. And that, I think, is what benefits that kind of place that you're trying to create that then people want to be in, and businesses that are already here flourish in.
Right.
You were talking about the making that non-incentive need to come to Fort Worth. Do you feel like so Frisco's a great example of blank canvas and creating a demand for people wanting to be there. What was most of that, when you talked about the funding they got for being smaller, did they use most of that for incentives, or what do you see how they use that to create a destination where people want to live, work, and play?
Yeah, I would say, again, from the standpoint of 4A4B, yeah, I mean, that was utilized for incentives. Now, you look at Dallas, for example, I mean, they set aside some dollars to fund DART, and so that's how they built out their transportation system. So, I mean, I think that different communities will use it in a different way, but I do think those smaller communities, they took that as an area where they could utilize those funds to jumpstart activity. And once you begin to get that ball rolling, you get other companies that like to be co-located. If you drill it down to a basic level, if you're going down a street and you get to an intersection and you see a CVS, you're going to see a Walgreens. If you see a McDonald's, you're going to see a Taco Bell. I mean, businesses cluster around each other, and that's a very simplified way of saying it. But so the same things happens on a broader scale. If you have a Chase Bank, we're going to get a Frost Bank next to them. I mean, they're going to build these facilities next to each other, and I'm talking about the larger, headquarters type areas. So here in Fort Worth, we're big on aerospace, aviation, and so you see a plethora of companies in those industries because that's our bread and butter, and they tend to gather around each other because they know that they have the workforce and talent to fill those types of positions. So I think that's really how it plays out. It's those communities have used those to kind of move forward how they view themselves as a city and the types of things they want to attract, just as we've utilized incentives to move forward specific target industries that we're interested in. I'd say the thing about Fort Worth is we have managed to retain our individuality, our uniqueness that I don't know that you necessarily see in some of our smaller suburbs. I can drive in some of those areas, and I don't know when I passed from one suburb to the next, right? Because it all just kind of
kind of like
in.
You just described with those
I'm
chains
not
on
naming,
each corner.
I'm not naming any names or anything, but yeah, it's just very cookie cutter. And so I think that's been the interesting thing about Fort Worth is that even though we've had this amazing growth over the past 10 years, the soul of the city is still there. We're still this Western kind of maverick spirit that I think some people find attractive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting because, and I don't know how much commercial or residential real estate owners that you're constantly talking about who's making these suburbs, because Dallas, Fort Worth is, I saw something recently, 80% of our city, like Metro, is 80% of all New York residential construction. And so the challenge is we're getting people to move to Texas, but they're moving to Texas for the affordable housing in the burbs.
Sure.
And lose, so, even regretting that feeling of, man, I thought I was moving somewhere pretty cool with a big house, and then I'm in, one road with a stop sign, and it takes 15 minutes to get out of here. Mm-hmm. So, like, how do we battle with people missing out on that Fort Worth? Because there's a lot of Fort Worthians who probably haven't seen even the inner loop because they exist on the outside of that loop.
Right, yeah. That's a good question. The growth patterns and what you generally call sprawl. I mean, the good thing about Fort Worth is it's 350 square miles. The bad thing about Fort Worth is it's 350 square miles, right? And we've got a lot of room to grow, particularly as you begin to head out west. The north part of the city has really been built out, and the Alliance folks, Hillwood, have done a great job out there. We're starting to see a lot of development in southwest Fort Worth. As I said, West Fort Worth seems to be the next big area where we're seeing a lot of residential come into play. So, it's hard to say how you combat that. I mean, we had a client in a couple of weeks ago. So they were from up north, and we were driving around the city and pointed out some houses. It's like, how much does that house cost? That must be like a couple of $1 million, right? It's like, no, that's about $450, maybe $5. And the guy's head just exploded. Like, wait, you can get that size house for $500,000? Yes, yeah. But that doesn't help a young recent college graduate. So I've got two kids. One's 26, one just finished college. My 26-year-old is at home because he can't afford a house right now. My 22-year-old is, starting his job search. And
our kids are exactly the same age.
Okay, yeah.
Mine are 26 and 22.
Right. So, as a parent, as a resident of Fort Worth, you go, okay, well, what is that going to look like for them in the next 5 years? And if we don't figure out some level of affordability when it comes to housing, I mean, yes, it's more affordable than New York and California, but we're also not paying as much as New York and California either. So we've got to get some balance and find some way to get some additional affordable housing here.
Yeah, it's I guess it's because like Frisco, I'm going back to them because I feel like nationally they're very proud of creating an example of a successful suburb that creates its own utopia that competes with its metro area. And so eventually this sprawl could lead to more of that because these tiny towns can invest in that incentive and do that. So I guess I don't know. I guess I'm wondering how, because now going to the question I wanted to ask is like, then you have the yang on the commercial side where we see the people don't want to really work in offices Monday through Friday anymore, but that's how we get the funds to pay the bills here in the city, and there's the investments downtown. So I guess, like, what's your take on the downtown scene and how that is a unique part? Like you said, you can drive into Fort Worth, feel it, see it. You're not in a suburb. But how do you look at what downtowns look like post-pandemic now that offices have to rethink their approach?
Yeah. Well, I would say a couple of things. So I think Fort Worth, relatively did better than most communities, but maybe not for the reasons that you're all thinking. So, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of talk like, oh, we don't have new Class A, we don't have corporate headquarters, blah blah blah, and yeah, okay, so that was out there. But I think the fact that we didn't have these massive office towers helped us actually weather the pandemic a little bit better. So we weren't hit as strongly as other communities. And I think we were able to rebound much faster. So I think overall downtown's, from a standpoint of vacancy, still pretty healthy. You still have, I think Mondays and Fridays are still a little wonky just because we don't have as many workers down there. But through the week, I think we're at pre-pandemic levels on a Tuesday through Thursday basis. So, we've got some new residential being developed downtown. You've got Omni doing their big expansion. So you got $2 billion worth of new investment that's happening on the southern end of downtown between Texas A&M and the Convention Center and Omni.
That's
and
exciting.
Sheridan made a huge investment. So a lot of things happening down there. So I think the health of downtown is still pretty strong. And we do have some great, vacancies down there that we can work to fill. Our challenge when it comes to attracting office tenants is, we have a certain level of vacancy in downtown, but if you look to some of our partners to the east, they've got double the vacancy. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they've got significantly more office buildings. They've got significant more vacancies. You see foreclosures. You see a lot of things being converted to residential. Like we've taken some and converted to hotel uses, things like that. But it's not as pervasive. Like I'm not reading a lot of things about foreclosures of downtown office buildings that I've seen in other cities. So I think relatively we're okay. But the work from home thing is still. I still think that's. I read some article that said, "Oh, the work from home thing has been solved," and the work from homers won. And
I wonder
it's
who
over
that
with.
is.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true right now, and particularly as you look at as how technology continues to evolve and what role AI is going to have in the future workforce. Yeah. I just don't know that we're going to need as many people in the office, and so how is that going to play out? So not just pandemic related, but just as business evolves over time, does that necessitate the need to have more people in the office? And also, I see it on the manufacturing side. So we'll go visit clients, and we'll go into these huge, beautiful manufacturing facilities, and there's like 50 people in there.
And the robots?
Yeah, and the robots.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, how do you get all this stuff done? Like, oh, yeah, we've got the robotic arm, and it's doing this, and we've got this one person that runs this whole machine. And so even manufacturing in some aspects is utilizing technology to a way to maximize efficiency and build better products, but you don't necessarily need as many people to do that. So I think that's still to be played out over time, I think.
I think when it comes to the type of thing where people have to collaborate with each other, that's kind of still in flux because yes. I think we thought, it's great working at home. And then I, for one, I get a little lonely, I would say. And I miss being in an office with another person and bouncing ideas off of other people and stuff. So I think that and I think some of the younger people, like my kids, which are the same age as your kids, are not interested in just being a slave to their jobs. Right. They want to have that work-life balance where they, can live their lives and be happy. But then to the point of being able to afford a house, when my husband and I bought a house back in the early 90s, I was just mentioning to him the other day that every 3-bedroom, 2-bath house was $139,900. That was the price of 3-bedroom, 2-bath houses in the early 90s.
Oh, I won't say what I bought my first house for, but it wasn't even $139,900.
Yeah, ours wasn't either. We got it for less, and it's 4 bedrooms. So, I mean, really, it's staggering how much more. Yeah. But, my kids are in California now, and we're helping them with rent out there.
Right, yeah. Yep, I understand.
Yeah.
So I guess, you guys are talking about your kids and you're talking about the expenses of homes and AI taking jobs. Like, what are you guys worried about your kids if they live in Fort Worth or they live in California? What, kids their age making it or being able to independently figure it out?
I think that they're having an influence on what the future work is going to look like. And so that's where I see the flux still happening. I think there's a lot of older people who are attached to the old way of doing things that have spent a whole lot of time, complaining about these youngsters and their unwillingness to work or whatever. And I don't think that it's an unwillingness to work. I think it's a healthy request of a better balance. And I think that is going to be the trend of the future. But you're the interviewee today.
No, that's great. You said it right. They don't want to be slaves to their jobs anymore. And it's just a different mindset. I have this conversation with both of my kids like every day. And, I do think it is a lot healthier. And I think some of that was driven by the fact that we did have a global pandemic and everyone was talking about mental health and what the impacts were. And they're like, okay, yeah, once I get out into the workforce, do I want to be in a situation where I'm not happy coming home, where I'm not happy with the work that I'm doing? So I do think they put much more emphasis on a good work-life balance. I think being passionate about what they're doing. So it's not just collecting a paycheck, but it's something I'm really passionate about. And I think you're right. I think that's going to have a big impact on the types of jobs that are being created and how work looks in the next 20, 25 years.
Yeah, I think my husband talked about that his goals were always like, I want to make more money than I made the year before. And that was based on kind of what his dad had done.
Right.
And he talked a lot about that when our kids were coming up. But my kids are like, I want to be able to pay my bills. I want to be able to do some traveling. I don't want to struggle and suffer, but I don't want to just, like you said, be a slave to a job and have to work every waking minute of the day.
Did your kids talk to my kids? Because that's the exact same thing that I heard from them.
Well, I mean, they are the same ages, so and
same
raised in
mindset.
Fort Worth,
Yeah,
so
same
maybe.
mindset.
Well, we're always excited that you come on and kind of share updates. So thank you for always doing so. And we're always champion you guys and what you guys are doing.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks, Sam.
So it was great to have Robert here. I've had different relationships with Robert over the years. He reminded us of the fact that we worked together when I was on the city council. And so it was nice to catch up with him and see the successes that are coming out of the economic development department. And we're going to move into our wins and losses.
Awesome. Well, we always start with our losses and end with a win. And I hear you have 2 losses for us today.
Yeah,
and
I'm
you're not
always,
turning them into wins.
I'm
That's not
always
happening.
trying to turn losses into wins.
That's
but
not
today
happening.
I had a couple of things that
Let it rip.
So the first one was there was a story talking about Greyhound, and I have a personal Greyhound bus service. I have a personal connection to Greyhound because I used to take the Greyhound bus from the small town that I lived in with my mom to Sacramento every other weekend to visit my dad. And so I don't know, there's a soft place in my heart for Greyhound bus
This all
travel.
is making more sense of who you are as a person and fighting for all modes of transportation. Jeez, this is good.
But the article indicated that the Dallas Greyhound bus terminal was being closed. And this is kind of a trend that I think is happening. I think some kind of investment company has purchased Greyhound, and they are divesting themselves of quite a bit of their probably pretty valuable downtown properties. And I think that this leads to folks not having access and connectivity to other public transportation. And thankfully, our Greyhound service is out of Central Station, which is a multimodal, intermodal transportation center. So I don't think we are going to risk losing that service in Fort Worth. But I think it's a loss for our neighbors to the east to not have that Greyhound service in downtown. They have yet to report where the new service might be located, but if it's not connected to the rest of the transit system, that can be a problem.
And this also looks, but there's the big loss in this is, right, the people who own it are just selling the property because it's valuable, right?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. That's what the article pointed to, and I think it's a Dallas Morning News article.
But and that's to me the tough relationship with capitalism. You know, as a capital list person who runs a business, capitalism only seeks to solve the solutions where there's demand, because then they can make a sustainable profit. But when all human needs don't lead to profit, which is why we're dealing with homeless crisis, we're dealing with not being able to fund our Greyhounds, is because these basic needs that people need, like pet shelters, aren't profitable ventures, but necessary ventures. And that's why I think we need more government support or safety nets and things involved from a government side when capitalists decide to give up on things like Greyhound. Give us your other loss.
So the other loss was there was an article pointing out the fact that we've been building a lot of homes rather quickly, and that there's some question as to whether the construction quality of these homes is to the level that it should be. So this was a KVUE ABC Texas news story. New does not mean correctly built. Dallas Fort Worth home inspector concerned about the fast new construction. And I can tell you that when I was house hunting in the early 90s, I kind of went and looked at some new construction because, oh my, it was so much more square footage, and there was like a great room and a media room and all these different things that older houses don't have, that I kind of maybe thought I was wanting until I went and walked around in some of these houses. And if you go into a 80, 100-year-old house, the construction quality, the materials, all of that just seems so much more solid. And in this article, they're pointing out some things where like rafters are not even being connected to the main beam and stuff is being clamped off and crimped instead of a cap put on it and all kinds of things. And some woman had an independent inspection done and pulled out of a contract of a house that she was planning to build because of that. So I think that we are in a fast and furious building to try to make sure that we have enough housing for all the folks that are moving here, and that we might want to make sure that the quality is there.
Yeah. No, if I was ever a cool nerdy economist like Piketty or any of these guys, one of the things I would want to assess is look at buildings made pre and post free markets and seeing what materials they use, how much profit did they make, and my assumptions are that before we pit real estate on, the stock market and maximize profit for stakeholders, buildings were built with a little bit more artistic touch. They were built with higher quality. They made less profit, but I look at Tokyo. I had this idea when I was at Tokyo and I did the little bus thing. I was a super tourist and I got on one of those buses and went around downtown. And I was just like, look how beautiful these buildings that we will no longer make, because the way capitalists operates real estate today makes it for what you're just talking about. People getting cheap and quick, these homes, and then you sell them to people who that's what they believe the dream is. And now they're isolated in the suburbs, stuck in places where they thought they were moving to Dallas-Fort Worth, and they live in Azle.
And all of these houses are built in massive, large subdivisions all at once. So they all are new at the same time, middle-aged at the same time, old at the same time. So it all kind of peters out at the same time.
And sometimes doesn't even get built by people who, these are sometimes international companies that are running these big, fast urban outfitter like, Sheen for real estate, so it's real. Cool. Well, my loss is going to kind of go down this kind of commercial or just real estate play. Texas faces a bigger burden than ever to pay rent. Study finds more than half of the state's 4.2 million renters spend at least 30% of their income on rent and utilities, according to a Harvard University report. This was in the Texas Tribune. Texas renters are under pressure. Some 51% of Texas renters, a record 2.1 million households, are now cost-burning, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities. Of those, nearly 1.1 million are severely cost-burning, meaning they pay at least half of their income towards rent and utilities. So you think about cars, you think about all the other additional things, healthcare, you think about daycare for your kids. It's impossible to live and exist. Rents in Texas skyrocketed as the state's population boomed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Rent growth has since cooled. Housing construction surged. Higher mortgage rates tamped down demand for homes, but rents are still considerably higher than they were before the pandemic.
Yeah, and every single time anybody talks about building more, especially multifamily, you hear people complaining and saying, oh, we don't want any more multifamily. I was just at a public meeting that the city of Fort Worth had on their master parks and recreation plan, and they have some boards up showing like what kind of development do you want to see in the future, and you could put green dots next to what you want to see and red dots next to what you don't want to see. And I overheard people saying, oh, apartments, that's just what we don't need. And I'm like, you're clearly not in the rental market looking for a home right now.
Yeah.
Because to your point in this article, there is a shortage of affordable housing. And part of that is a shortage of units available.
Yeah, and there's a lot of data of how this is the biggest issue with homelessness is just lack of affordable housing. I mean, that's pretty clear. Almost 40% of rental households earning between $45,000 and $75,000 were also considered of being spending too much on rent. So that's still, it's not just a income issue. There's a lot I could discuss about this. This could be a whole topic, but yeah, that's my loss. And yeah, we just got to figure out how to, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic bottom level shouldn't be about profitizing and maximizing profit. So let's continue to vote in our elections. Please register by February 5th. Boom. All right. So let's move to wins. I'll go first on the wins, since mine's, again, still state level kind of win. And this one's truly not even a win. This is just a side effect of what happens when Texas doesn't actually service its people. It has surplus of money, but people can't afford to live or buy health care. Texas leads country in healthcare exchange enrollments. About 3.4 million Texans enrolled in health insurance through the Affordable Care Act health insurance marketplace, nearly doubling the next largest state. Texas has more residents signing up more than any other state to the Affordable Care Act, which is 3.4 million enrolled. The federal government insurance exchange saw a 21.3 million enrollees, representing 30% increase compared to the year before. The Biden administration announced Wednesday Texas accounted for 12% of those enrolled. Texas leads the country because we also lead the country in the least amount of people uninsured. Texas high enrollment numbers are interesting comparison to our nearly 17% of Texans who lacks health insurance. With the new year, I always have to upgrade my insurance because me and my wife are off of our company's benefits, and we have employees, and the amount of expense this is to our company is real. And I feel like I should be doing more for our people, but you're talking six figures of costs to small businesses like ours to try to do this because Texas is not providing better insurance to its people. And so, yeah, that's my win is Texas's are taking benefits of what federal programs are available to there. And I think it's important to always highlight, especially when there's a lot of tension right now about Biden versus Abbott at the border. Texas, again, needs our federal government to be conscious and somewhat humanistic to their, people, that we can actually thrive.
Yeah, and I don't mean to take away from your looking at this as a win, because as my husband is independently employed and has to do the same kind of thing you're talking about of finding insurance for us every year. And this year I went to my regular yearly OBGYN appointment and was told that the insurance we have doesn't cover a well woman check. And I'm like, okay, we're not going to try to keep people well. We're just going to take care of people when they're sick.
Yeah.
And then basically my husband's comment was that all of the policies that were less expensive and covered more are slowly but surely being made unavailable because insurance companies are not making enough money off of them. And so they're just taking them away and then leaving only the ones where they can profit. So sorry to turn your win into a loss.
Yeah, no. And no, this is definitely a loss just on how America runs its healthcare system. And honestly, that should be our biggest, we worry about the wrong things when we look at voting and who's doing a good job or not. Like, everyone's impacted by healthcare. I don't know a single person, even a conservative person, who's like, man, I love my healthcare. It's like we can all agree that people are profiting and this is a big sham and we should do something about it. Texas disenrolled about 1.8 million residents from the federal low-income insurance program, the most of any state. So we can turn it into a loss. I can keep going. The Lone Star State also had the highest rate of disenrollment, renewing only 39% of Medicaid recipients. Children accounted for about 65% of Texas disenrollments. Heck, EJ doesn't have a win today. We just gave you another loss.
Oh, that's sad.
You have a good win. A quaint local restaurant pleased you that you want to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. So many of you might be aware of a restaurant on Bluebonnet Circle called Belinti's Love, which is a vegan Mexican restaurant, which we have frequented and liked for many years. But they have a sister restaurant now just right next door practically called Vida Cafe, which is Italian food that is also vegan and a lot of gluten-free options. Well, it would be gluten-free because vegan, I don't know. I am not vegan.
You're just here for the good food.
I am just here for food that I enjoy and like, and within walking distance of my house, which is very helpful as well. But we went last night to Vida for the first time and had a lovely time. The people at both of these restaurants are just so friendly and nice. And so every time my husband said something about, oh, they're really trying hard, I was like, no, this is how they always are when we come into these restaurants. They're very friendly and very nice. And we had a lovely dinner last night, and I encourage everybody to go check it out.
Well, I look forward to going to that restaurant eventually. I've been to Belinti's and loved it. So thanks for shouting out and always being a supporter of our local businesses. Guys, this is another episode of the 817 Podcast. We went extra long, had a nice interview with Robert Sturns. Please subscribe, share. I know we need to get more involved civically. If Fort Worth is going to change, more people need to be listening to content like this. So please share with a friend, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Now they control your